This is ridiculous. 2335, the Mamba shuffle. That might be 2900. Is this chess, bro? Is this not chess, bro? Okay. Hopefully this isn't chess, bro, on like a Smurf. Okay, so this is in English. This might be Amon Alts, no? Could somebody confirm? Are they streaming? So basically they're playing the anyways. We're gonna play this normally. So we have in English in a slightly weird setup by white. We're just developing our pieces. Now the d4 square is weak. How do we exploit, on the basis of this concept that we've discussed many times, what should be our next move? What should be our ultimate idea? What should be our ultimate idea? We want to get the knight to d4. How do we do that? Bingo! Bishop g4. Again, I must emphasize this point. We don't want to rush giving up the bishop for the knight. We want to have this option in our pocket so that when the time comes, we play bishop takes f3, knight d4. Now here he's got knight d5. So what should we do here? What comes to mind? And this is a great example of us not rushing with the move knight d. So yeah, we can play knight d4. But before we do that, let's get rid of this knight. It's annoying the hell out of me. And then let's play knight d4 to try to shatter his kingside pawn structure. Does that make sense? There is another perk of going knight takes d5. What is it? What idea becomes now possible in the future now that we removed the knight from f6? And which one of these pieces should we actually end up taking? This is where people are going to go wrong. The idea is f5. And because this idea exists, here's what we're going to do. Normally, we would take the knight and keep our knight established on d4. But because I believe the idea of f5 is so strong, we're actually going to take the bishop. And now we're going to castle, and we're going to try to ram f5 through. And we're going to try to apply as much pressure as possible on this knight. So this is a great example of where... Okay, so he's gone g4, but he's stopped f5, but he's made massive weaknesses on the king side, which we're going to try to exploit in the long term. And by the way, f5 is still an idea. We can sack a piece here. But before we do anything, we need to sort of break into the center. If we let his pawns remain in the center, we're going to have a very hard time getting stuff done. So let's go c6 to break him up a little bit. And potentially we can play d5. And ultimately, if we can get this pawn off of e4, it's going to be easier for us to get f5 in. So black is better here. I think that he did a good thing, our opponent, by playing f(h3, g4. Otherwise, it would have been crushing. But a great position for us. Let's see if we can capital. Queen a2. Okay. So that's weird. And he's trying to discourage us from playing f5. I get the ultimate idea. And how can we deal with this pin? That's sounds like a mom bod shuffle move. Dad bod shuffle. No, we want to prepare d5, right? We want to prepare d5. And yeah, let's go king h8 first. Let's unpin ourselves. Let's unpin ourselves so that we don't have to worry about not being able to play f5. Okay, he's attacks our pawn. Let's defend it. Rook c8. And get the rook into the game. Okay, nothing surprising here. And now let's prepare d5. How do we prepare d5? Who can name a good move? And here's what I want to hear. I want to hear a move that doesn't sacrifice the health of our position in preparing d5. So a move like rook e8 would not be good because it would make it harder in the future to prepare f5. We want the rook remaining on f8 in case we have the opportunity to play f5. So let's go queen e7. This also just connects the rook. Even if we don't go d5, we just connect the rooks, which is good. And that's just independently good regardless of what we do. So he stops d5 because he's going to take and take c8. And we now have to find a way to somehow twist the knife in. So let's actually go b5. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to discourage. He goes a4 anyway. Let's take it. He takes with the queen. And this actually might be a good time to start sacking everything with f5. Because he's gotten his queen away from the king side. And I actually think that might be a really interesting try. Let's do it. Let's sacrifice a piece on f5. His king is wide open. So I feel like my two rooks and the queen are going to constitute enough material to cause him tremendous difficulty in defense. Okay, but he finds a really nice idea. So I could take on f3 and probably make a draw. But how else could we attack the knight? Ooh, but he has a defense there. Uh-oh, this is not good. One sec. Let me think. Well, queen f6 and queen f7. The problem there is he goes rook a8. The problem there, and I missed this idea. This is a problem. I mean, he found this very quickly. Yeah, we're going to have to go rook f3 here. We're going to have to accept this endgame. We're going to have to accept this endgame. And I don't know who's better. I think black is still better. Now he's attacking this. So let's go h5, create some luft. Let's create some luft. And this rook is undefended. Alarm bells, alarm bells, alarm bells. Rook is undefended. King is weak. Fork, 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 fork. Queen g5. Game is over. So we were still better there because his king was so wide open. And the ultimate goal was to win b4. Good game. Wins the rook. And the sacrifice actually ended up working. Although it was close. He found a very nice defensive idea. No, it's not crazy. It's just that he played too fast. Now, the idea of this line, if we go bishop c5, what idea does white have? This is hilarious because we just talked about this in the previous game. So who can apply the same idea to a different position? What do you look for when there's a knight on c6 and bishop on c5? Exactly. This is actually the theoretical line, and black is, it's not that black is in trouble, but white can get a better position here, which is why bishop b4 is considered to be the best move. So now everything we did here should be very obvious. Knight d4. And this is where I made the judgment call. I was like, okay, we want to play f5, and it would be less effective to play f5 if we were to do this, because one of the benefits of f5 is that we increase the pressure on the knight on f3, and it's important to keep the knight there. It's important to keep the pin, and we castle because we want to recapture on f5 with the rook to enhance the pressure on the knight. Okay, so he chases us away, but he does it at the cost of creating weaknesses. Now we open up the center. We go king h8 to unpin ourselves. Queen e7 to connect the rooks and prepare d5. b5 to stop a4. Now, why didn't I consider h5? So a lot of people wanted me at some point to play the move h5. And the reason that I didn't play it is I was afraid that it would create more harm than good, right? The good that it would create is that it would soften up his kingside. The harm that it would create is that it weakens my own kingside. And this is a great example of applying a concept I talked about earlier, which is, does he have enough pieces on the kingside to exploit this weakness? And the answer is actually yes, because what idea does white have that he can now apply? And he can start piling up on a weakness that has just been created by playing h5, hg. Rook h1, yeah. And guess what? That queen ain't too far away from h3. And then he's going to be threatening checkmate. And attacking this pawn isn't such a big deal. White can just defend it by moving the knight out of the way. So this was a judgment call. I didn't do any calculation to determine this. It was just something I decided on the basis of these observations. That's all that I was thinking. And this is the critical moment. Now, I was worried that if I did not go f5, he would basically put pressure on the pawn and my initiative was going to evaporate. So something like this could be nasty. And I just felt like my chances to get stuff done on the king side were rapidly evaporating. So that's why I thought, okay, I need to do something right now. And that's why I played f5. Now, part of the reason I thought this was a good time for f5 is that his queen is kind of out of the game. It's out of the defense. So it's as good of a time as any because his knight is his only piece guarding the king. This may be unsound, but I actually don't see exactly how white can defend easily. If he goes rook c6, I'm just going to go rook f8, right? I don't really care about him taking the pawn. What I want to do is pile up on the f-file. There's some cool lines here, but I actually have to go in like 3 minutes. So I'm going to just talk about one more moment, which is like here, why didn't I pile up on the knight even further? And the reason was the move rook a8. What does this accomplish? Well, if we take the knight, then he cuts the legs off with rook takes f8, and then queen takes f3, right? If we take the rook, then obviously he forces the queen trade. Actually, he can even win the queen with rook c8. So we kind of have to take now or never. And what happens now is that we have a queen for 2 rooks. 4 pawns each. His pawns are super weak. He does have a pass pawn. He should have gone rook b1 to protect it. But instead, he went for this weird idea of shifting his king away. He just forgot about this fork. I think he didn't realize that his rooks were unprotected. And when you have 2 rooks against a queen, one of the top pieces of advice I have is to keep your rooks defending each other. Queens are incredibly good at forcing forks. When you keep your rooks defending each other, it reduces the possibility of forks. In addition, rook b1 would defend the b4 pawn and defend its neighbor on c1. So there would have been no forks. I think this is a draw. I basically probably would have had to force a perpetual. Black has ways to play for a win here. But I don't think that black is substantively better. He is not 2900. I don't know what people are talking about. So in any case, guys, I hope this game makes sense. There's more to talk about, but I have to run. Bishop b6. This is all theory. Now we bring our bishop out. We try to get rid of this knight. And now, thank you, Bofeng, we have that trap. And this time he plays correctly. The last time he played king h2, and he blundered this trap. This is actually the best move. Now, we have one more piece that we need to bring into the game. What should we do? What piece do we need to bring into the game, which currently is not doing anything? And that's a very simple way of doing that. Of course, we need to bring the rook. We need to put it on e8 because we've vacated that square by the other rook. Yeah, so d8 would be a little less effective. It would just be sort of staring at the pawn. And basically that pawn on e4 is what we're trying to target here, right? We are kind of centering our forces. Okay, that is a very strange move. Oh, that is actually not a strange move. So DC, he wants to play f4, and then he wants to play e5 and drive in that wedge into my position. Thank you, Tyler Mandel, gifting to Via Trash. Let me think about this for a second. Okay, so what do we want to do here? How can we react to a move like this? Well, there's many things we can do. We don't actually have to take. But one thing that I want to show you guys is a positional piece sacrifice we are going to take. And here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do, let's see if he plays f4. He does. We're going to sacrifice a piece. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to move the knight back to d7. That should be logical. And after e5, how are we going to... I assume he's going to play e5. How are we going to sacrifice a piece? What are we going to do to break open the position? We're going to do it for 3 pawns. And we're going to do it because his king is a lot weaker than mine. So it should make sense to you guys, logically speaking, that opening up the position will allow us to attack. Okay, so we have 3 pawns for the piece. Let's take stock for a second. What do we need to do? What we need to do is we need to basically get our pieces to the king side. First of all, let's take the rook. And let's reduce that tension. Now, queen on a5 catches my eye because it's under fire of the bishop. Can we put the queen on a square where it's at least making contact with something on the king side? Well, we can put it on c7. Yeah, it's making contact with the pawn. And I want to make it clear that the queen can be very strong on squares like these because it's kind of hidden by my own pawns. So it can't be targeted by my opponent. And I can combine it with a move like knight h5 and start pressuring the pawn, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to do here. No secret. Okay, so he's driving his pawns in. Knight h5, maybe he's got bishop b2, chasing it away. So let's actually go h5. And let's see if we can ram this pawn to h4, potentially. Okay, now we need to defend the c5 pawn. He's just attacked it. So I see he wants to probably go a5. That's probably what he wants to do. And then what we're going to do, why did we play h5? What is the logical follow-up to that move? Okay, he doesn't do it. He actually is playing this game extremely well. Now, h4 here would be logical, but then he just played g4. So this knight on f6 can be improved. Where can we guide this knight? Where can we maneuver it? Well, he's got an extra piece for 3 pawns. So we can maneuver it to e5. That's a central square. We can maneuver the knight to e5. And that would chase the queen away. And that would open up the bishop slightly for now. So let's see where he goes. So I would say the position is unclear. I don't think we're worse. I don't think black is better. He's been playing this tremendously so far. But this is where a lot of people go wrong. Like, this is an unbalanced position. Any mistake could cost either side the game, basically. Okay, I don't think white is clearly better. I would respectfully disagree with that. I think it's unclear. Okay, so he goes here. And he pins our knight to the queen. Pins our knight to the queen. Okay. What should we do here? Who can come up with an idea? So g5 is good. g5 distracts the queen. Yeah, and he plays it super well in response. And now what we should do is let's bring our queen into d7 to support the rook so that the knight can then move. Okay, we're going queen d7. Goes rook d1. That's... Oh, I actually missed that move. Yeah, we have to go to e7, actually. That's what we should have done initially. Should have gone to e7. I forgot that he had this move. Yeah, very sharp position nonetheless. So what is going to be our plan here? Our plan is going to be twofold. And we still want to target White's king. And sometimes in order to target your opponent's king, what you have to do is create stronghold squares for your piece. Okay, bishop e2. That's another insane, very good move. Yeah, this is getting very Monka-esque. So let's go g4. Let's just explode the king side. Yeah, he's playing very good, but we're going to sacrifice a pawn here in order to open up some avenues, okay, which he doesn't take. He instead piles up on the square. He wants to checkmate us. Well, I got to take. We can't let him checkmate us, so let's take the bishop. Now let's activate our queen. And let's put it on f6. Potentially targeting the f3 square. That's what I'm doing. This is another really good move. One sec. Okay, I'll go rook d8. I'll attack his queen. Queen h7 is not checkmate because we have this f8 square. Sorry, I'm not like explaining as vocally as normally, but okay. Okay, now we're gonna get the rook in. We're gonna get the rook involved. We're gonna attack the bishop. And now, he's not cheating. Relax. Now we're gonna go check. We're going to force the queen trade. And at the end of the queen trade, what are we going to do? We're going to take the pawn. And now what happens? We have all of these pawns. And we need to push them because they are passed. But we need to push them very strategically. What we first need to do is win this pawn. If we win that pawn, then we will be able to start pushing the other pawns more easily because this is like an obstruction. So let's capture it, and then let's start pushing the c pawn. And let's see who's first. Okay, first we're going to bring our king out. Oh, God, I just made a big mistake. I allowed bishop f4, which I missed. Oh, God, this is bad for me. This might be my first loss, actually. Let me focus for a second, guys. Let me just focus here, and then I'll explain the stuff at the end. Yeah, this guy's playing the game of his life, but he's totally legit, 100%. And it's not easy to bring me down, so I think I'll be fine, but we'll see. Okay. It's another amazing move, by the way. Jesus. I can do this though. Oh my God, I'm under the fork and he doesn't see it. Oh my God. Woo, that was close. Okay. I'm going to the fork there at some point. You are the fastest improving chess player, he says. LMAO. Oh, okay, I can't talk on this account. That was an incredible game by my opponent. He played like a GM. I have to give him full compliment. That was an incredible play. Okay. He says you're the fastest improving chess player. I don't know if he knows this is a speedrun account. Okay, so there's a lot to explain, guys. I'm sorry. And this is going to happen progressively. And I get it. One sec. I think he was joking. The accuracy is going to be very low because of the last part of the game. Thank you, Pat M, for the prime. Damn, I'm playing well, guys. 84.3 for him, 92.5 for me. So it's like high quality chess, but there was close. There was a moment when I thought it was losing. Okay. So if I had lost that game, there would be no shame. Now, let's talk through some of the key moments here, because a lot went on, and I want to explain some of the things that I didn't fully flesh out during the game. Okay, so this line we repeated literally move for move, and I've had this over the board. Now, basically, does anybody remember if white goes a3, and even Anatoly Karpov fell into this? What is the trap that I had illustrated previously? Does anybody remember? There is a very, very beautiful idea that black has here. And the way you see this is the bishop is not on its fianchettoed square. I've explained that previously, which means that the square on f3 is vulnerable to a potential fork, which means we have to distract the queen, but we can't distract the queen yet. We first distract the knight, now we distract the queen. Then we fork the queen and the king. We take the queen. And you might be like, well, wait a second. Now white gets 2 pieces for a rook. White is fine. No, he's not. The knight is now hanging. And if the knight goes out to g5 and counterattacks the rook, then we can counterattack white's rook. And at the end of the day, black's going to be up a lot of material. So this is the thing that happens after a3. It happens even after f4. You can take on e4 anyway. And if white takes the other knight, then you take on g3. And this is where my idea of a piece set came from. This is actually theory. And black's got a very strong attack against the exposed king. And this should make sense to people. Thank you. Hello, Desk. Sorry, Hell Desk. Gifting to Beer Fish. Appreciate the support. Okay, so this makes sense to people. So king g2 is the best move, according to theory, because he defends the f3 square. So this obviously will not work now. You will no longer have a fork on f3. You'll simply blunder the knight there. And that's prophylaxis. So rook a8 makes sense. And now c5 is a move I'm not familiar with. According to the computer, let's see, what according to the computer, this is a very good move. And this move might actually throw this line. So what should I have done here? I should have actually moved my knight away first, probably, so that c5 wouldn't be a thing. So the idea of c5, as you guys already understand, I think, is that, okay, he's attacking the pawn. So I can't ignore this. If I push d5, good night, man, then we blunder the pawn, right? And by the way, if we pin the queen to the knight, he can take on f6. That is check. Okay. So no problem, I take. Now he goes f4, he attacks the knight. This is like an undermining move, right? Because now he's got the possibility of going e5, because the pawn is no longer on d6. This is a very unpleasant situation, because he attacks the knight. If I move my knight away, then queen takes d7 happens, and he wins the other knight. You might look at this for a second and say, well, no problem, you can go knight to d5. But guess what? He takes twice, and now look at the position very carefully. Bishop on g7 is locked out by white's pawn chain. That's why pawn chains can be so scary. Knight on d7 is hanging. Pawn on c5 is weak. Pawn on b7 is hanging. Do you guys see how bad this is? I mean, this is just a nasty position. This is just visually a nasty position. And so I made the decision, the executive decision, and this is my biggest advice perhaps from this game. When things are going wrong like this, you want to find a way, as some chess authors call it, to change the course of the game, or change the trend of the game. Sometimes the game is moving in the wrong direction, and sometimes it might very well be the case that the computer actually recommends knight to 5. Maybe that's marginally speaking the best move. But it's a lot more uncomfortable for your opponent if you do something like sack the knight, because that basically changes the landscape. It forces him to adapt, and hey, guess what? It's actually not that bad. So you want to make sure that this way that you're choosing of changing the course of the game is actually not terrible. And this isn't, because we get 3 pawns for the piece, and we weaken his king. But I think you guys see what I'm saying. I am not a millionaire now. So we take twice. He goes bishop d2. We take the rook. And now queen c7 should make sense to people. We are moving the queen out of the range of the bishop. Queen c7. Okay, a4. a4 is a very good move. What is the purpose of this move? What exactly is he accomplishing here? Which is actually very instructive. I'm going to take a sip of the pho. I put a lot of hot sauce in it too. A lot. Okay. 95 is the best move. Nice. So what he's really doing, no, he's not preparing the rook lift, because the rook lift is pretty far-fetched because he's got a knight here. What he's basically doing is preventing my pawns from pushing forward. He's reducing the mobility of my pawns. And he's doing that by preventing d5. And eventually he can push his pawn to a5. And what that does is a very interesting situation. I played h5 to potentially go to h4 and create weaknesses on his king. Let's say that he would have played a5. The problem here is if I ever push the b pawn, what does white do in this situation, and what does white accomplish as a consequence of doing that? And this is a situation you guys should sort of file into your mental Rolodex. So he takes on Poisson, and what he gains is the a file, and he can use this a file. He can put his queen there. He reduces my pawn majority, and he can infiltrate down that a file if he wants to. So it's a very hard situation to get out of if you're black, but he decided to go bishop f2. Okay, so I went b6 to defend the pawn. Now we got our knight to a slightly better square. And here he played extremely well. So queen f4 is nice. g5 for a second, I thought it wins a piece, but it doesn't. Heldesk, thank you for the gift to Dark Dodo 94. Because he's got queen e4. And if we unpack the situation, the knight cannot move because the rook is pinned. So I defended the rook so that the knight can move. But he goes rook d1, and he attacks my queen, forcing it to move again. Okay, so I move it, and he goes bishop back to e2. Very nice move. How does he find this move? The moment I played g5, my opponent was like, this pawn on h5 is now weakened. I tell you guys to do this all the time. When a pawn is pushed on a particularly important side of the board, you should understand for like 5-10 seconds, okay, what weaknesses are created. So the pawn on h5 is now weak. It's not defensible by any other pawns. And so he drops his bishop back to attack it. And remember that I have sacrificed a piece, so I can't just willy-nilly give up pawns, which I kind of did because I had to. So if he takes on g5, I just take his bishop. Remember that the queen is defending the bishop. So if he takes on g5, I simply take the bishop. So that is a very classy move, which hopefully everybody understands by now. I played g4. The reason that I did that was I figured if I'm already giving up a pawn, and there's literally no way to defend this pawn, I figured I might as well induce some marginal weaknesses in his position, so I thought I might as well get rid of his h-pawn, so that his king becomes a little bit weaker. And I think that there was no reason for my opponent not to take the pawn. I think he bought my bluff, which was also part of why I played it. This is just like bluff, because if black is nothing, black is much, much worse, /lost. And bishop e2 was a crusher. So bishop back to d3 gives me a bit of a respite, because now I take on d3, I still have 3 pawns for the piece, I can centralize my queen and stuff. And this is where I was like very much on thin ice. So a lot of people would see this move and think, this is just crushing. But the reality is the bishop on g7, one of the perks of putting it there is h7 is not going to be checkmate. You're just going to be able to slide your king to f8. And Mayonnaise Master, gifting to Raffle is a lot. Thank you guys. So does that make sense? That's why I allowed myself this move. He does give a check, but then he quickly realized that I actually have a bigger threat than he just played on the board, which is queen f3 check. That's why he brings his queen back. I go rook t2. And this is where I made a very, very important decision. The decision I made here is to trade queens. Yeah, queen d4, I hallucinated that he has checkmate. For some reason, I forgot that his rook is not on e1. I thought this was mate, but obviously it's not. So I saw this move and forgot about it. This would have been super strong. Instead, I basically give up a pawn in order to get into an endgame. Why did I do that? So the reason I did that is in the same spirit. It's a move in the same spirit as knight takes e5. He is ready. He is geared up to attack. And by trading queens, I'm forcing him to adapt to a new type of situation. And also objectively, look at my pawn mass. I judged that these pawns would essentially be unstoppable. I was kind of wrong because he played this extremely well. What he basically does is he gives up the pawn, but he goes for piece activity. Look at how he activates his king. He brings his rook to an open file. Very instructive play. Bishop up to an open diagonal. King out to f5. I mean, now I'm in huge trouble. I had to find this really important move, rook a3. The idea of this move is if he takes on f6, what happens? Who can tell me what the idea of rook a3 is? Yeah, no one understands the algorithm. I think a lot of my viewers are subs now, so that's a good thing. So yeah, rook f3 in the end. So basically I'm repositioning my rook to get f3 win the knight. That is a defensive idea that I found. Hey, Min. And basically, what happens now is we get this pawn race. The pawn race comes down to some tactics. And here, I could have forced a draw, but I found this idea. Takes and bishop b2. Amazing position. I'm down a rook, but he can't stop my promotion. So he tries to distract me by giving me this check. And now I go king f8. I'm not sure if this actually works. I'm going to check the computer here. Ooh, oh my god, white is winning. So I could have made a draw. I could have made a draw with king g7. White is winning with a beautiful idea. Very hard to find. Yeah, so king h6. Now the reason, okay, I think we know your answers in Kosa. I think the reason this is hard to see is because we allow promotion. And even though black is now up 2 pawns, and it seems like we're out of the woods, white goes king h7, that's the whole idea. And g7 is unstoppable. This idea is literally unstoppable. White makes a queen, white wins the game. So, I mean, but finding this in time pressure is so hard, particularly because you have to refrain from giving a discovered check, which is incredible. But what I did, I maneuvered my king to g8, and by the narrowest of threads, I'm able to avoid checkmate. And white is already losing here, because if he gives a check on f6, the bishop is multitasking, because it's A, it's supporting the promotion square, but B, it's defending this square. Otherwise, it would be checkmate, obviously. All right, so at this point, I promote the queen. This is still very tricky, but I made a queen. Or I actually blundered a fork. That's kind of funny. I didn't expect king c8. I expected king c7. Then I thought I was going to give a check, but he went king c8. And he could have made a draw here with knight e7. So I got very lucky here. This could have easily been my first loss. It could have also easily been my first try. And we got another gifted sub from Helldesk to Ships at Dark. But hopefully the explanations make sense. This was a pretty complex game. And my opponent played extremely well. So big kudos to Vanya Hargreaves. This speedrun is officially over my head. But okay, I want to push back on that. Perceptius, what part exactly, if I may ask, was like you feel like over your head? Like, what explanation do you feel like was, or was it sort of a general thing? But if there's something specific that I can clarify or explain better, I want to do that, and I mean it. I mean, I know that this game is complicated. I'm under no illusions. And I don't expect beginners to follow everything I do and say. Right, but that's a limited mentality, right? Because after the game, I explain everything very slowly. I'm not expecting people to follow everything during the game. But after the game, I'm really trying to break things down in a way that most people will understand. Okay. All of it was over my head. Even the explanations? Okay. Yeah, there is a ton to unpack. And remember to ask specific questions. Like, I'm trying to, like, group things into concepts, right? So, for example, in the opening, right, the way that I think you guys should think about this, if you're rated 700, 800, how should you try to understand these games? You should try to categorize the moves rather than trying to understand each move on a granular level. You should try to, so changing the course of the game. So you should try to understand what a move accomplishes on a broad level. For example, a move like knight e5, okay? Like, what does this move accomplish? Like, what is the purpose of this move? And what is the purpose of this move? Because all of these moves belong to the same exact category. This move, and even this move. All of these moves have been played with the same intention in mind. It's not outpost. Why? It's all about the meta patterns. Activating your pieces. You're simply completing your development in a way that is geared toward exploiting the main weaknesses in your opponent's position. Because white has two main weaknesses here. It is his central pawns, right? His central pawns are the things that we want to attack here. So not only do we position our pieces on better squares and sort of develop visually, we put them on squares where they are better at applying pressure at white's main weaknesses. Okay? So then the move knight takes e5, right? How do we categorize this move? This is a changing the course of the game move. So the last couple moves, white has been putting pressure on me. And, I have to move my knight. I mean, anybody should see that. My knight is being attacked. So knight e5, I explained. I explained why this is bad. And the reason this is bad is because of several factors that coalesce together and make black's position very nasty. The first thing is there is simply a lot of hanging shit here, right? And you guys should just see that, right? That the knight is hanging, queen takes b7, and if the knight moves, then you give up this pawn because the bishop defends the queen. Then there is a set of more positional factors, so non-concrete observations, nothing that relates to a specific thing that is hanging, but rather, if you look at this bishop, guys, if you look at this bishop, what can you tell me about this bishop? Is it a good bishop? Is it a bad bishop? And why? So I'll explain, and that is where, so queen c7 would protect everything in the immediacy. But the bishop is obviously bad, right? It's terrible. It's blocked by the pawns. And that's why I mentioned the pawn chain. Pawn chains are really good at blocking off certain pieces. Now, queen c7 defends against the immediate threats. But as I have explained, black's position isn't bad only because there's hanging stuff. It's bad because there's a lot of long-term weaknesses. And so one thing that white can do here is go rook a to d1. Attacking the knight. He can also go, what is another way of attacking the knight here? What is the other way here of attacking the knight? Yeah, the bishop is just not doing anything. It's just staring at the pawn. So there's also bishop e5, right? And this sets a pin. So that is where intuition comes in. When I look at this position, I don't break everything down to these separate assumptions. That's what I do as a teacher to help people understand. And I don't expect people to do that. But when you do this consistently over the course of many years with many positions, you train your brain to immediately understand the important factors in the position. So I see this like quickly. I say, okay, the bishop is bad, stuff's hanging, queen is super active, and these factors, they come together to make the evaluation what it is. So, well, the rook on e1 is sort of supervising that e-pawn. So this rook is not doing anything. This rook is closer to the center. You want both rooks closer to the center. And that's basically the logic. The other thing I want to make clear here is that, you know, even at this level, things really can be broken down to these similarities. The game has become more complicated. And what does complicated mean in the context of chess? What it really means, in my opinion, is there's more imbalances, right? The positions are less symmetrical. There's more positions where there's a ton to unpack, like there is here, and a lot more hinges on calculation. Like, we both see this line, so I decide to sacrifice a piece in order to take the game into a different direction. That's what it means to change the course of the game. Let me give you a drastic example, which I think will help people understand the concept of changing the course of the game. This is a very famous game, and one of the craziest examples I have ever seen of changing the course of the game that occurred at a grandmaster level. Prepare to get shocked right here. And by the way, I really appreciate when people are honest with me about, like, you know, certain things they don't understand. I'm truly passionate about helping people understand this stuff. So let me set up my chess basic. So this is actually going to blow your mind. And it'll take me some explaining to explain to you guys why the position is lost, but I will manage to do that, I think. So that's what you guys have decided to play, is a game that is very tricky. Okay, so actually, so I've been setting this up all along. Yeah, so basically you guys can see that this is a game between Jabrbak and Spassky. Boris Spassky, of course, world champion, but he was 19 when this game was played. And in this position, Jabrbak is the oldest living GM currently. In this position, white is completely winning. White is completely winning. Why is that? Why is white completely winning? Let's flip the board. There's several things to notice here. The first is look at this piece of crap right here on g7. Look at this piece of crap on g7. It's literally doing absolutely nothing. But that's not even the most important thing, the fact that black is super passive. Look at the h file very, very carefully. You guys see that there is a pawn on h5. This pawn on h5 could capture the pawn on g6. That opens up the h file, and white could use this h file to deliver checkmate very, very quickly. So let's draw up a quick example. Let's say black develops his knight. Okay, this should be reasonable to everybody. We're just developing our knight. Okay, white takes on g6. We open the h file. Now, how does white attack this pawn? What is a specific way in which white could attack the g6 pawn. There's many plans here that win the game, but I want to give you guys a specific example of how quickly things could go bad. So this attacks the pawn. It also opens up a little avenue for the queen to come out to g4. So let's say black defends it with his king. Black says, I'm getting the king out of there, and simultaneously, I'm going to defend the pawn. Now white has a small tactic that leads basically either to checkmate or to total devastation. Find it. Yeah, knight g6 is correct. Sacrifice, checkmate. That's it. Now, black can defend this slightly more resiliently, but he is not going to be able to stop white from piling up on the h-file and ultimately delivering some sort of a checkmate down the h-file. That, again, I hope is clear to everybody. So Spassky was like, man, I am completely lost. I'm completely lost, and I have to do something right now to radically change the way that the game is going. And he plays a move that's one of my favorite moves ever played, because this move is so absurd. It is completely losing. It doesn't objectively do anything to save the position, but it shocks the opponent so much that Averbach started to play absolutely horribly as a consequence of this move. Now, you guys are coming close when you say knight takes d5, but knight takes d5 actually just make things around. This guy's a GM. He's not going to like flip out at knight takes d5. Actually, we've had one guy see it, which is blind score. Yeah, knight c6. RN's thank you for the prime. Knight c6. So the knight is going to d4. So white has to take it. Literally just giving up a full piece for minimal compensation. Minimal. There is, however, some compensation. So what has been created as a result? First of all, white's center has been removed. Now, if you look at this knight for a second, where can this knight travel? Yeah. So a lot of you guys are noticing that the knight can go out to d4. The other thing is, black has this big pawn center, and eventually he could break through with d5. Now, these are things that do not compensate in the least for the fact that white has an extra piece. White still has that h-file attack, and this is completely losing. But if you watch what happens, Spassky actually starts to capitalize on these things. So Averbach actually does the stuff that I mentioned. And Spassky, guess what? Well, he gets his knight to d4, okay. And somewhere around this point, Averbach started to play very badly. Now he goes queen f7, and all of a sudden it turns out that white's h-file attack doesn't lead to clear checkmate. In the meantime, Spassky actually begins to attack. And Averbach is winning. Spassky takes another pawn. And then things get really chaotic. Things get complicated. Averbach was winning with this move, but this is not that easy to see. So there's actually a really sexy idea here that this involves. So rook h8 was winning. Why? Because after bishop takes h8, rook takes h8. This is a pin. King has to, skewer. King has to move. Rook takes b8. It actually looks like black is a winning move. It actually looks like black is winning here. Because you can take the knight, you'll still be down a piece. But black can do what? Black can play... No, knight c2 is not checkmate because of king d2. But you're thinking in the right direction. Now, this move would be checkmate. But there's a queen on g4 that would take at e2. So what you can do is play f3. Intercepting the queen's control over this square. And the point is, if white goes king d2 and tries to evacuate, we give a check, and we give the checkmate. Using the knight on d2, white has a defense. White is an amazing defensive idea here. I'll let you guys think about it so I can finish off that thought. But white actually can defend against this checkmate. And this is really tricky, so I'm not really expecting everybody to see it. I mean, this is something I would maybe miss. It's a two-move idea. But you go knight f4, sacking the knight. And after e takes f4, so bishop takes d4 is not necessarily the best. You can play queen takes f3 immediately. And because of the pin, the knight cannot move. This would actually be checkmate were it not for the pin. e2 is protected. And on the next move, you can eliminate the knight and black's attack fizzles out. Knight f4 is a very pretty move that exploits this latent pin here, right? You don't think this matters, but it actually does. So quite a beautiful defensive idea. And that's kind of the point of this whole thing. So basically, my voice just cracked there. But Averbach goes bishop d4, and eventually they get into this endgame, and Spassky starts pushing his pawns. And look at how many pawns Black has in the center. So basically, the game goes on and on and on, and the game actually ends in a draw. The hilarious thing is Spassky was actually winning at some point. Things get chaotic. Spassky was actually winning at some point, and you can see how much chaos there is on the board. He wins an exchange that Averbach blunders, and then Averbach is the one who has to save the draw, which he does, improbably. But basically, that was one of the most famous applications of this concept. And I hope that it makes a little bit more sense now. Like when you're completely losing and you feel like your opponent's just going to steamroll you, you got to find a move that has some sort of shock value. But more importantly, it has to be a move that could plausibly turn the game around. Blundering your queen has shock value, but it's just going to accelerate your defeat. That's where people misunderstand this. I'm not suggesting anybody give up your rook for free or give up your queen for free. You got to find a move that actually does have an idea, as this move did, right? You actually gain something. The Botez Gambit is not going to help. It has to be something that creates actual chances at the same time. It can be something whose psychological value does outweigh its objective value. What about a rook? Jacob99, thank you for the friend. Okay, back to the speedrun.